We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Victorian mansion in Pacific Heights, highlighting the meticulous attention to detail that had gone into its restoration. Grant Lynch stood in his home office, adjusting his Hermes tie as he gazed out at the San Francisco skyline. At 45, his salt and pepper hair and tailored Tom Ford suit projected the image of success he'd spent decades cultivating as managing partner at Lynch, Moon & Associates. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 5 times, its deep resonance echoing through the house. A reminder of another day managing Silicon Valley's most complex mergers and acquisitions. The house itself, purchased 15 years ago during the dot-com boom, stood as a testament to their success. Each room perfectly curated under Beatrice's exacting supervision over 3 years of renovation. Grant. Beatrice's voice carried up the curved staircase. The party planner is here to discuss Oliver's graduation celebration. And Violet's on FaceTime. She needs to talk about her final architecture project. Grant descended the stairs to find his wife in the formal living room, surrounded by fabric swatches and catering menus. At 43, Beatrice Lynch commanded attention in her Chanel suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled. The party planner, a young woman with a tablet and an anxious expression, sat perched on the edge of an antique settee. "We'll need to coordinate with the Stanford Club about the timing," Beatrice was saying, her new Van Cleef and Arpels bracelet catching the light as she gestured. The guest list includes half the federal bench and most of Silicon Valley's legal departments. On the iPad propped on a side table, their daughter Violet's face beamed from her UCLA dorm room. At 20, she had her mother's grace and her father's determination. "Mom, the professor loved my sustainable housing design. They're considering it for the department showcase." "That's wonderful, darling," Beatrice replied. But Grant noticed her attention was divided, her eyes frequently checking her phone. "I'll fly down next weekend to help you prepare for the exhibition. We can do a spa day at La Prairie." "Another LA trip?" Grant raised an eyebrow. "That's your 3rd this month." "Violet needs support during finals," Beatrice replied smoothly. "And the Children's Hospital Board is considering expanding to Southern California. I'm meeting potential donors." The party planner cleared her throat. "Mrs. Lynch, about the wine selection?" "Oh, Hubert's handling that." Beatrice brightened. "He has such excellent taste. We spent hours at K&L Wines last week, selecting the perfect vintages. He's been invaluable with all the planning." Grant watched as his wife's fingers traced the edge of her new bracelet, a gesture he'd noticed becoming more frequent. "I wasn't aware Dad was so involved in the preparations." "He's been wonderful," Beatrice gushed. "We've had the most fascinating discussions about investment opportunities, too. Did you know he's been involved with some exciting ventures in Hong Kong?" On the iPad, Violet's image froze momentarily. "Mom, you're breaking up. And don't forget you promised to look at my roommate's situation for next year. The housing deposit is due soon." "Of course, sweetheart. We'll discuss everything this weekend." Beatrice ended the call and turned to the party planner. "Now, about the table settings." Grant retreated to his study, his legal mind cataloging subtle shifts in his wife's behavior. The increasing trips to Los Angeles, the new jewelry appearing with suspicious frequency, the long lunches with his father that never quite aligned with her usual schedule. The door opened, and Oliver strode in, fresh from his federal clerkship. At 25, he was everything Grant had hoped for in a son. Stanford Law Review editor, judicial clerk, and already showing promise that surpassed his own early career. "Judge Morrison mentioned you today," Oliver said, loosening his tie. "That task force merger last year still has people talking." "Catherine's a fair judge," Grant replied, studying his son's expression. "How are the wedding preparations going?" "Sarah's getting stressed about the timing, with my graduation and the bar exam coming up." Oliver poured himself a scotch. "Mom's been helping, though she seems distracted lately. Lot of meetings with Grandpa Hubert about the graduation party." The mention of his father's name triggered something in Grant's memory, a pattern of small inconsistencies in Beatrice's behavior. The way she tensed slightly when Hubert's name came up in conversation, then overcompensated with enthusiasm. The increasing frequency of their meetings about Family events. Has your sister mentioned anything about your mother's LA visits? Grant asked carefully. Just that they seem to be happening more often, Oliver replied. Though half the time, Violet says Mom's too busy with meetings to actually see her. Something about real estate viewings and investment opportunities. From downstairs, they could hear Beatrice's voice rising with excitement as she discussed seating arrangements. The party planner's replies were muted, overwhelmed by Beatrice's growing enthusiasm about flower arrangements and wine pairings. Your mother's always been detailed-oriented, Grant said, but his mind was already analyzing the patterns, the way his years of legal training had taught him to look for inconsistencies in testimonies, the small tells that indicated something deeper lurking beneath the surface. The grandfather clock chimed again, marking another quarter hour in the perfectly orchestrated life of the Lynch family. But beneath the polished surface, hairline cracks were beginning to spread, invisible to all but the most careful observer. The call came at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, interrupting Grant's careful review of the latest Silicon Valley startup acquisition. His sister Lee's name flashed on his iPhone screen, unusual for this time of day when she was typically showing luxury properties to tech millionaires. Grant. Lee's voice carried a tension he rarely heard from his usually composed sister. I need to see you. Today. And not at your office. 20 minutes later, Grant found himself in a quiet corner of the Presidio Social Club, away from the usual financial district crowd. Lee sat with her back to the wall, her usual polished real estate agent demeanor slightly frayed at the edges. I've been debating whether to tell you this for weeks, she began, her fingers tapping nervously on her water glass. But after what I saw today at Shreve and Company, I can't stay quiet. Grant waited, years of deposition experience having taught him the power of silence. They didn't see me, Lee continued. I was in the private viewing room with clients, that tech couple from Singapore, looking at engagement rings. Beatrice and Hubert were in the main showroom. She paused, taking a slow breath. Grant, they were looking at a diamond and sapphire choker with matching earrings. The kind of set that costs more than most of my listings. The way they were together. Explain, Grant said quietly, his mind already beginning to construct a timeline. It wasn't just today. My office overlooks Coqueri Estiatorio. I've seen them there 3 times in the past month alone. They take those curved booths in the back, the ones meant for couples. Last week, they were at top of the mark. Lee's voice dropped lower. He was feeding her dessert, Grant. Their body language, it was intimate. Too intimate. Grant's hand tightened imperceptibly on his scotch glass. How long have you been observing this? It started subtly. Shared glances at family dinners, private jokes. I thought I was imagining things at first, but then I started seeing them around the city. The way they look at each other, the subtle touches. Lee pulled out her phone, scrolling through her calendar. I've been keeping track of dates and locations. The frequency is increasing. Show me, Grant said, pushing aside his untouched drink. Lee slid her phone across the table. The notes were meticulous, dating back nearly 6 months. January 15th. Lunch at Coqueri, 2.5 hours. January 23rd. Shopping at Neiman Marcus, holding hands in the elevator. February 8th. Top of the mark, intimate dinner. February 17th. Seen entering Fairmont, separate times, but within 10 minutes. The list continued, each entry more damning than the last. There's something else, Lee added hesitantly. I overheard them at Coqueri last week. They were discussing some kind of investment opportunity in Hong Kong. Hubert was talking about millions in potential returns, something about a tech company going public. Grant stood abruptly. I need you to write down everything you've observed. Times, dates, locations, conversations. Every detail, no matter how small. What are you going to do? First, I'm going to make a call. Marion Hagen's office was deliberately unremarkable, a small suite in a building full of insurance agents and dental practices. The woman herself matched her surroundings, middle-aged and forgettable in appearance, which made her excellent at her job. Private investigation is an art form, she said, reviewing Lee's notes. People see what they expect to see. They don't notice the woman reading a newspaper in the hotel lobby, or the tourist taking photos of the architecture. I need everything, Grant said. Surveillance, financial records, Electronic communications. Cost is not an issue. Marion nodded, already making notes. I'll need access to accounts, properties, phone records. And Grant? This type of investigation often reveals more than people expect. Are you prepared for what we might find? Just find me the truth. The investigation began quietly. Marion's team tracked movements, photographed meetings, monitored financial transactions. Each day brought new revelations, each piece of evidence adding to a picture Grant couldn't quite bring himself to face. The electronic surveillance is particularly interesting, Marion reported a week later, spreading photographs across her desk. They've been using a private email server, but they weren't as careful as they thought. The emails told a story of increasing intimacy, of shared secrets and growing desires. Hubert wrote of investments and opportunities, of a future filled with wealth and freedom. Beatrice's replies spoke of plans and possibilities, of a life beyond the constraints of their current existence. The financial angle needs deeper investigation, Marion added. I'm seeing patterns that suggest significant movement of funds. You'll want a forensic accountant for this. I know just the person, Grant replied, already reaching for his phone. Marvin McDonald's office at 4 a.m. looked like a war room. Documents covered every surface, each stack representing another layer of deception. The forensic accountant had spent 2 weeks unraveling the financial web, and what he'd found had kept him working through the night. The mortgages were just the beginning, Marvin said, spreading out property records. Your father has remortgaged his Sausalito home 3 times through different banks, used forged documents to hide each transaction from the others. The property's underwater by at least $2 million. Grant studied the documents, his trained eye catching details others might miss. Show me the loan shark connections. That's where it gets dangerous. Marvin pulled out a red folder. We've identified at least 3 major players in Chinatown. The Fong brothers, the Golden Dragon Syndicate, several smaller operations. Conservative estimate puts the total around 2 million, but the real number could be higher. Underground casinos? From here to Sacramento. High-stakes poker games, private betting rings. Some of these establishments have connections to organized crime in Hong Kong and Macau. Marvin shuffled through more papers. But here's where it gets interesting. He opened his laptop, pulling up a series of emails. Your father's been spinning an elaborate tale about being a silent partner in a Hong Kong tech startup. According to these messages, he's due to inherit millions from a non-existent family trust. He's used this story to secure loans, buy time with creditors, and... Marvin hesitated. And Grant prompted. And to impress your wife. Marvin pulled up another document. We found offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, opened in Beatrice's name 6 months ago. Small transfers at first, but increasing in frequency and amount. Grant's expression remained neutral, but his hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Show me everything. The next hour was a detailed exploration of betrayal, documented in bank statements and wire transfers. Beatrice had been actively participating in the scheme, using her social connections and charity work to add credibility to Hubert's lies. The safety deposit box was the final piece, Marvin said, sliding across several manila envelopes. Consultations with divorce attorneys specializing in high-net-worth separations. She's been planning this for months. Timeline. The earliest evidence of their financial entanglement dates back 14 months. Small things at first, spa weekends, shopping trips, restaurant bills. But look at this progression. Marvin laid out credit card statements in chronological order. The spending escalates dramatically about 6 months ago. Jewelry, luxury hotels, private car services. Grant studied the papers, his legal mind calculating implications and consequences. The loan sharks. What's their timeline? That's the critical factor. Marvin consulted his notes. The Fong brothers are getting impatient. Your father used Beatrice's social connections to buy time, suggesting her Silicon Valley contacts could facilitate international investments. But they're starting to ask questions. The early morning light began to creep through the windows as they reviewed the evidence. Each document added another layer to the story. A story of addiction, deception, and betrayal that threatened to destroy everything Grant had built. There's one more thing, Marvin said, pulling out a final report. We found evidence that they've been researching properties in countries with no extradition treaties. They're planning something, Grant. Something big. The sun rose over San Francisco Bay. Grant had conquered deal by deal, case by case. In his office high above the streets, he began to formulate a plan. The foundation of lies his family had built was about to crumble, but first, he needed to understand every crack, every weakness, every point of leverage. The game they were playing had stakes higher than either of them realized, and Grant Lynch had not become one of San Francisco's top lawyers by showing his hand too early. The Fairmont Hotel's grand ballroom buzzed with San Francisco's elite. Gary Danko himself had overseen the menu planning, his reputation for perfection matching the Lynch family's own standards. The guest list read like a comprehensive who's who: Silicon Valley tech billionaires in casual black turtlenecks that cost more than most cars, federal judges maintaining dignified poses, state senators working the room with practiced charm. Paula Moon surveyed the scene with the shrewd assessment she developed during her decade as a federal prosecutor before Grant had convinced her to join Lynch, Moon and Associates. That transition had raised eyebrows in the legal community, a star prosecutor joining private practice, but their partnership had proved formidable. Now, she activated the discreet recording device disguised as a brooch, her former FBI connections proving invaluable. The team's in position, she murmured to Grant as they passed near the wine service station. Rodriguez is working the east entrance, chins on surveillance. Grant nodded imperceptibly, his attention on the sommelier, presenting a bottle of 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild. The wine cellar had been his particular passion, each bottle carefully selected over decades of collecting. Hubert had insisted on handling the wine pairings for the evening, though Grant noted with professional displeasure that his father had chosen several bottles he'd been saving for Oliver's wedding. "Your father's selections are interesting," the sommelier commented diplomatically, presenting the cork. The 82 Lafite for the first course, the 90 Petrus for the main. He was quite insistent about the order. Grant's jaw tightened slightly. Those bottles represented nearly $100,000 of carefully curated wine, now being served to demonstrate Hubert's supposedly sophisticated taste. Another sign of his father's grandiose gestures with other people's treasures. The room filled as more guests arrived. Judge Catherine Morrison, who had mentored Oliver during his clerkship, engaged in animated conversation with the CEO of a prominent tech firm. State Senator Williams discussed judicial appointments with a group of senior partners from competing firms. Every person in attendance represented a carefully cultivated connection, though not necessarily in the way Beatrice had planned. "Your wife seems energized this evening," Paula observed, watching Beatrice flutter between groups in her Oscar de la Renta gown. The new tennis bracelet, Hubert's latest inexplicable gift, caught the light with each gesture. "She's been planning this evening for months," Grant replied, his tone neutral. "Every detail has been precisely choreographed." Hubert worked the room with the confidence of a man who believed in his own illusions, pausing frequently near Beatrice, their interactions carrying an intimacy that seemed increasingly obvious now that Grant knew to look for it. The FBI agents, disguised as wait staff, documented each lingering touch, each meaningful glance. Oliver stood with Sarah near the entrance, accepting congratulations with the gracious humility that had made him so popular at Stanford. His law review pin caught the light, along with the Rolex, Hubert's graduation gift that now carried a weight of questions. "If I could have everyone's attention," the maitre d' announced, "dinner is served." The seating arrangement revealed Beatrice's mastery of social engineering. Tech investors flanked federal judges, creating potential connections. State senators sat strategically near law firm partners, each placement calculated for maximum impact. Gary Danko's team executed dinner service with military precision. The butter-poached lobster arrived perfectly timed with the 82 Lafite, its complexity matching the orchestration of the evening itself. Grant watched his father hold court at his table, noting how Beatrice's attention seemed magnetically drawn to his gestures, his stories. "The surveillance feeds are all active," Paula confirmed quietly. "Every conversation is being recorded." The main course arrived, Wagyu beef with black truffle, paired with the 90 Petrus. Judge Morrison raised her glass appreciatively. "Your father's wine selections are remarkably generous, Grant." He must have spent a fortune. He's always been generous with other people's resources, Grant replied smoothly, catching Paula's slight nod of understanding. Oliver rose for his speech as the dessert course was being prepared. His voice carried clearly through the ballroom, strong with conviction earned through academic excellence and judicial clerkship. I stand here today because of the values my parents instilled in me, he began. My father taught me that integrity in law isn't just about following rules. It's about standing for what's right, even when it costs you. Grant watched Beatrice during their son's speech, noting how she fidgeted with her bracelet, how her eyes kept darting to Hubert. The evening was building towards something. He could feel it in the air, in the way his wife kept checking her phone, in the barely concealed anticipation in his father's expression. The soufflés arrived, perfectly timed and rising magnificently. Gary Danko's reputation for precision extended even to dessert. As coffee service began, Grant noticed Beatrice straighten in her chair, her expression shifting to one of determination. Paula appeared at his elbow. Thompson says they've intercepted text between them. Something's about to happen. The coffee cups clinked gently against fine china as San Francisco's elite finished their desserts, unaware that they were about to witness the implosion of one of their most prominent families. Beatrice rose with the fluid grace of countless charity galas, her Oscar de la Renta gown catching the light. The subtle shift in her posture drew attention, a skill honed through years of fundraising and social manipulation. Around the room, phones appeared in manicured hands, ready to capture what they assumed would be a proud mother's toast. Hubert moved to join her, his progress unhurried but purposeful. The new tennis bracelet on Beatrice's wrist, his latest gift, caught the light as she placed her hand possessively on his arm. The gesture carried an intimacy that suddenly seemed obvious to everyone watching. If I could have everyone's attention, she began, her voice carrying that practiced warmth that had opened checkbooks and hearts across San Francisco. Family means everything to me. It's the foundation of all we do, all we are. Judge Morrison set down her coffee cup, legal instincts sensing the shift in atmosphere. The tech billionaires paused their discussions of IPOs and acquisitions, turning to watch. Senator Williams's wife gripped her pearls unconsciously. Over these past few years, Beatrice continued, her voice taking on an intimate tone that made the 100-plus guests lean forward slightly. I've discovered that family can surprise you, that the connections we forge can transform in ways we never expected. Oliver sat straighter in his chair, his law review pen suddenly seeming like a child's toy against the adult drama unfolding. Sarah's hand found his under the table, her engagement ring, his grandmother's ring, catching the light. Hubert has been more than just a father-in-law to me. Beatrice's voice carried clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom. All those family reunions we were planning, her timing, perfect as always, built the tension. Well, we were making your siblings. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Oliver's face drained of color. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Violet, standing near the dessert table with her boyfriend, swayed slightly before turning to flee the room, supported by her partner's steady arm. The gathered guests froze in a tableau of shock and fascination. Judge Morrison's coffee cup hung suspended halfway to her mouth. The tech CEO's phone remained raised, still recording. Senator Williams's fork clattered against fine china, the sound shocking in the sudden silence. Beatrice stood triumphant in the center of it all, her hand still claiming Hubert's arm. Her face showed no shame, no regret, only a kind of victory, as if this public declaration was a carefully planned achievement finally unlocked. I know this may come as a shock, she continued, her voice carrying that same warm, practiced tone she used for charity auctions. But love doesn't always follow conventional paths. Hubert and I have found something special, something real. The silence stretched for another breathless moment before the murmurs began. Shocked whispers rippled through the crowd like waves. Judge Morrison carefully set down her cup. The tech CEO's wife clutched her pearls, literally, while prominent divorce attorneys in the crowd reached discreetly for business cards. Mom? Oliver's voice cracked slightly, the confident young lawyer replaced by a confused child. Dad? What's happening? Beatrice turned to her son, her expression softening marginally. Darling, I know this is a shock. But your father and I haven't been happy for years. Hubert understands me in a way no one else does. Once the inheritance comes through, the word inheritance hung in the air like a match near gasoline. Grant rose slowly from his seat, years of courtroom experience lending him a calm he didn't feel. Grant Lynch rose with the measured precision that had made him legendary in corporate law. His bespoke suit showed no sign of the tension coursing through his body as he addressed the stunned crowd. He promised you millions, didn't he, Beatrice? His voice carried clearly, honed by decades of courtroom experience. A secret inheritance from mysterious Hong Kong investments? Beatrice's triumphant smile faltered slightly. Hubert's hand tightened on her arm, but there was a noticeable tremor in his fingers. The money is real, Hubert declared, drawing himself up with wounded dignity. The tech company goes public next month. I've been a silent partner for years. Paulamoon, positioned perfectly, nodded to the audiovisual team. The ballroom screens flickered to life, displaying the first piece of evidence, bank statements showing multiple mortgages on Hubert's Sausalito home. 3 mortgages, Grant stated, his voice taking on the rhythm of devastating cross-examination. Each obtained through forged documents, each hidden from the other lenders. Would you like to explain that to the banking executives in the room? The color drained from Hubert's face as more documents appeared. Loan agreements, gambling markers, surveillance photos from underground casinos. Each piece carefully selected and sequenced for maximum impact. Did you tell her about the loan sharks in Chinatown? Grant's question cut through the murmurs. About the $2 million you owe to the Fong brothers? Or the $1 million in gambling debt spread across every underground casino from here to Sacramento? Beatrice's hand dropped from Hubert's arm. Her perfect composure cracked as she stared at the financial documents projected for all to see. That's not. Hubert, you said the money was coming from investments. Oh, he's been investing, Grant continued, moving with deliberate steps. Investing borrowed money in poker games and pai-gow tables. Would you like to explain to Beatrice how you've been using her social connections to buy time with your creditors? The screen showed emails now, correspondence between Hubert and various loan sharks, dropping Beatrice's name, promising that her Silicon Valley connections would facilitate international investments. Dorothy Lynch rose slowly from her seat, her voice carrying decades of family history. It's not the first time, Hubert. Remember Clara? My own sister? Tell them about the other women you've promised fictional millions to. Tell them about the patterns I've watched repeat for 30 years. The revelation hit like another physical blow. Hubert staggered slightly, reaching for a chair. Beatrice's perfect mask crumbled completely as she looked between her lover and the evidence displayed for all to see. The money was real, Hubert insisted weakly. The investments, the inheritance. Show them, Grant commanded. The final documents appeared, complete records of Hubert's gambling history. Security camera footage from casinos, dated receipts, desperate IOUs written on hotel stationery. The evidence mounted on the screen, each piece more damning than the last. Your father has lost over $3 million in the past 18 months alone, Paula explained to the stunned room. Every cent borrowed, every promise backed by nothing but lies about fictional investments. The tech billionaires exchanged knowing looks, recognizing the hallmarks of financial scams they'd seen countless times before. Judge Morrison made quiet notes, her experience with fraud cases telling her exactly what she was witnessing. Oliver and Sarah had moved to Violet's side, the siblings drawing together in their shared shock. Their world had shifted on its axis, everything they believed about their family revealed as carefully constructed lies. Beatrice stood alone in the center of the room, her perfect composure shattered, the weight of her choices visible in every line of her body. The tennis bracelet glittered accusingly on her wrist, a symbol of promises built on nothing but air. The Fairmont's Grand Ballroom, which had begun the evening as a showcase of the Lynch family's success, now stood as a silent witness to their unraveling. The half-empty wine glasses, the untouched desserts, the shocked faces of San Francisco's elite, all testified to the moment when carefully constructed lies finally collapsed under their own weight. 48 hours after the graduation party revelations, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in San Francisco buzzed with coordinated activity. Three task force teams occupied separate war rooms, their efforts synchronized through Paula Moon's careful orchestration. Team Alpha has surveillance on Beatrice Lynch, Special Agent Thompson reported, updating the digital boards. Team Bravo's monitoring Hubert's movements, and Team Charlie's tracking all financial activity. We've got real-time alerts on any account transactions over $1,000. Paula studied the surveillance feeds showing both targets. The past 2 months of FBI coordination had positioned agents throughout San Francisco's financial district, with particular focus on the banks where Beatrice and Hubert conducted their operations. The criminal complaints are ready, Chan said, distributing documents to the team leaders. Wire fraud, 20-year maximum. Bank fraud, 30 years. Money laundering, 20 years per count. We've documented 17 separate instances. Thompson pulled up a timeline on the main screen. The investigation's been building since March. Paula's initial suspicions about the Cayman accounts triggered our involvement. The graduation party just accelerated our timeline. Show me the financial tracking, Paula requested, moving to the second war room where Team Charlie operated. Agent Rodriguez, head of financial surveillance, pulled up a complex network of transactions. In the past 48 hours, we've detected attempts to move funds through 6 different offshore accounts. Mrs. Lynch accessed her safety deposit box at First Republic yesterday morning. Our inside team confirmed she removed several documents and what appeared to be bearer bonds. Flight reservations? Paula asked, though she already knew the answer. Confirmed, Chen replied. Tomorrow morning, 6:15 a.m. to Georgetown, Grand Cayman. Business class under her maiden name, Beatrice Carlton. She's booked a connecting flight to Singapore for next week. Grant Lynch entered the command center, his appearance immaculate despite the early hour. The past 2 days had aged him, but his legal mind remained razor-sharp. The Fong brothers made contact, he announced without preamble. They're calling in their markers. 2 million due by noon, or they start collecting their own way. Paula pulled up surveillance photos showing known triad enforcers outside Hubert's Sausalito home. We need to move now, before this turns violent. The operation proceeded with military precision. Team Alpha positioned agents at San Francisco Airport, coordinating with airport security to monitor all terminals. Team Bravo surrounded Hubert's house, while Team Charlie maintained electronic surveillance on all known accounts. At 5:43 a.m., Beatrice Lynch entered Terminal 3, her Louis Vuitton luggage a testament to priorities unchanged by impending arrest. The terminal's cameras tracked her progress through the pre-security area, feeding directly to the FBI command center. Target 1 approaching checkpoint, Thompson's voice crackled over secure channels. All units in position. Beatrice placed her Hermes handbag on the security conveyor belt, her movements betraying no anxiety. But as she reached for her passport, federal agents emerged from their positions. Mrs. Lynch, Agent Chen stepped forward, his badge prominent. I'm afraid you'll have to postpone your trip. The facade cracked instantly. This is ridiculous. She protested as agents secured her passport and carry-on items. I have legitimate business meetings in Grand Cayman. Ask my investment advisor. Your investment advisor is currently being arrested in Sausalito. Paula Moon emerged from behind a pillar. Along with all your offshore account documents and bearer bonds. Simultaneously, Team Bravo executed their warrant at Hubert's house. They found him in his study, surrounded by papers, desperately trying to contact Hong Kong banking connections. The inheritance is real. He insisted his agents let him out. The tech company goes public next week. I just need more time. Back at FBI headquarters, the evidence rooms filled quickly. Each team's findings added to the massive case. Offshore account documents, forged loan applications, surveillance photos, wire transfer records, gambling markers, and emails detailing years of deception. The timing was critical, Paula explained to Grant later that morning. The Fong brothers' threat accelerated everything, but it also proved fortunate. Beatrice's attempt to flee gives us additional charges, and Hubert's desperate calls to Hong Kong provide more evidence of intent to defraud. 1 week after the arrests, Oliver Lynch's federal courthouse office had transformed into a secondary evidence processing center. His clerkship experience, particularly in financial crimes cases, proved invaluable to the prosecution team. The pattern becomes clear when you track the Thursday transfers. he explained to Special Agent Thompson, spreading documents across his desk. Mom's hair appointments at Pierre's provided perfect cover. 90 minutes every week where she claimed to be unavailable, but bank cameras show her at 3 different branches. Thompson nodded, annotating the timeline. Your documentation skills are exceptional. Judge Morrison mentioned you've worked similar cases during your clerkship? 2 major financial fraud cases last year, Oliver confirmed. Never imagined I'd be applying those skills to my own family's case. A knock interrupted them. Violet stood in the doorway, clutching a portfolio of architectural drawings. The past week had changed her, grief and determination warring in her expression. Berkeley accepted my transfer, she announced, moving to her brother's desk. I can start next semester, but that's not why I'm here. Look at these. She spread out detailed architectural plans, redesigns of their Pacific Heights home. I've been working through everything by doing what I know best. See how the spaces flow? No more hidden corners where secrets can live. Every room connects honestly with the others. Oliver studied the drawings, understanding the therapy behind them. You're healing through architecture. It's more than that, Violet insisted. I'm presenting it as my thesis project. Architectural transparency as emotional healing. Professor Chun thinks it could be groundbreaking. Dorothy Lynch arrived, carrying files of her own. In the week since the arrests, she had transformed family pain into community action. The support group has doubled in size, she reported, setting down a thick folder. 3 families from Marin County, 2 from Pacific Heights, all dealing with similar frauds, similar betrayals. We're meeting 3 times a week now. She pulled out newspaper clippings about other cases. Wealthy families destroyed by gambling addiction, offshore account schemes, relationships built on financial lies. Clara's story was just the beginning, Dorothy continued, referring to her sister's past experience with Hubert. Once we started sharing experiences, patterns emerged. The gambling, the promises of mysterious investments, the gradual isolation from family members who ask too many questions. Tell us more about Clara, Violet requested, setting aside her drawings. Help us understand if we could have seen this coming. Dorothy's expression tightened. 15 years ago, Clara was vulnerable after her divorce. Hubert swooped in with stories about secret Asian investments, promised her millions if she just helped him access certain accounts. Sound familiar? What happened? Oliver asked, his legal mind cataloging similarities. She lost everything. Savings, house, relationships with family who tried to warn her. The same pattern we're seeing now, just on a smaller scale. That's why I started the support group, to help others recognize the signs before it's too late. Violet returned to her architectural plans, adding notes. Each family's story helps me understand another aspect of design. See these sightlines? They're based on the Wong family's experience. Their father held secret meetings in spaces just like these. The siblings worked together, legal expertise and architectural vision, combining to create something stronger than their pain. Dorothy's support group provided context, helping them understand their experience as part of a larger pattern. Sarah's organizing dinner at the house tonight, Oliver mentioned, checking his phone. Simple food, honest conversation. It's becoming our way of reclaiming the space. Speaking of space, Violet looked up from her drawings. I've been thinking about Mom's closet. All those designer clothes bought with borrowed money, hidden credit cards in shoe boxes. Evidence, Oliver reminded her gently. The FBI team cataloged everything. Dorothy watched her niece and nephew working together, seeing strength emerge from wreckage. Your father called earlier. He's establishing trusts for both of you, ensuring your financial independence. The divorce proceedings took place exactly 1 month after the arrests. San Francisco Superior Court Judge Martinez's private chambers provided refuge from the media circus that had enveloped the Lynch family scandal. The asset division is straightforward, Grant's attorney explained, displaying forensic accounting reports. Mrs. Lynch's attempts to hide assets have simplified our task. The court has clear evidence of financial misconduct. Beatrice sat across the room, her Chanel suit a remnant of former glory. Her attorneys shifted uncomfortably as evidence mounted. Offshore account transfers, hidden assets, attempted flight with bearer bonds. Mrs. Lynch, Judge Martinez spoke firmly, Your actions show clear intent to defraud both this court and federal authorities. The settlement terms reflect this reality. The final judgment was devastating. Beatrice would retain only her personal property and a small portion of joint assets. Her participation in Hubert's schemes, combined with her own financial manipulations, had consequences. That evening, Grant met with his financial advisor and Paula Moon in his home office. The trust documents for Oliver and Violet lay ready for signature. The structures are ironclad, his advisor confirmed. Their futures are protected, regardless of federal case outcomes. The trusts are completely separate from any contested assets. Paula reviewed the documents with her prosecutor's eye. You're doing the right thing, Grant. Giving them financial security without enabling the patterns they've witnessed. Their eyes met across the desk, months of shared crisis having forged something deeper than professional respect. Paula had been his partner in law for years, but recent events had revealed her true character: strength, integrity, unwavering support. The doorbell signaled the arrival of family dinner guests. Oliver and Sarah entered first, carrying grocery bags rather than catered food. Violet followed with her latest architectural renderings, and Dorothy brought wine from a local vineyard, modest but honest. Judge Morrison asked about you today, Oliver mentioned as they set the table. The legal community's impressed by how transparently we've handled everything. Transparency seems to be our new family theme, Violet commented, indicating her drawings. Berkeley's architecture department wants to develop my thesis into a full research project. They see applications beyond residential design. Dorothy uncorked the wine. No borrowed expensive vintages, just genuine local product. The support group keeps growing. We're partnering with addiction counselors now, specifically addressing gambling's impact on families. The conversation flowed naturally around the dinner table, touching on work, studies, future plans. No one directly mentioned Beatrice or Hubert, but their absence shaped the interaction. More direct communication, fewer careful evasions, genuine emotions rather than social performance. I've been thinking, Grant said as they finished their meal, about what makes a family truly strong. It's not the appearance of success or social standing. It's this: being together, being honest, supporting each other through difficult times. Paula's hand found his under the table, a gesture of support born from shared challenges. Oliver and Sarah exchanged glances full of understanding, their own relationship strengthened by weathering family storms. Violet's architect's eye absorbed the scene, appreciating the authentic connections her designs sought to facilitate. The Lynch family scandal had indeed become a cautionary tale in San Francisco's elite circles, whispered about in boardrooms and charity galas. But here, in this room, it was transforming into something else, a foundation for rebuilding, stronger and more genuine than before. The evening continued with coffee and conversation, laughter and occasional tears, as a family learned that love based on truth needed no embellishment. No borrowed millions, no elaborate facades, no false promises. Just people who cared about each other, sharing honest moments, building a future based on what was real rather than what merely appeared to be. Dorothy raised her coffee cup in a quiet toast. To the truth. It may not be what we expected, but it's always what we need. The others joined her, each adding their own hopes for the future. And in that moment, the Lynch family began writing their new chapter, one honest page at a time. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California, stood stark against the morning sky as Beatrice Lynch, now inmate number 847623, prepared for her parole hearing. 5 years of incarceration had stripped away the designer clothes, the perfect makeup, the carefully cultivated image of San Francisco society. Her prison-issued khakis bore little resemblance to the Chanel suits she once wore to charity galas. Inmate Lynch, the guard called. The panel is ready. The parole boardroom felt smaller than she remembered from her last unsuccessful hearing. 3 years into her 8-year sentence for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges, Beatrice had learned that federal parole boards were immune to the social charm that had once opened doors throughout California society. Mrs. Lynch, the lead commissioner began, reviewing her file. Your record shows participation in financial literacy programs and addiction counseling. However, Your most recent psychological evaluation raises concerns about genuine remorse versus regret for consequences. Would you like to address this? Beatrice's hands, once adorned with Van Cleef and Arpels rings, clutched a plain tissue. I've had 5 years to think about what I did to my family, she began, her voice lacking its former practiced warmth. To my children. Oliver hasn't visited since the sentencing. Violet sends cards on Christmas, but she trailed off, the reality of her losses overwhelming the prepared speech. Across the bay in San Quentin, Hubert Lynch faced a different kind of reckoning. His 12-year sentence reflected both the larger scope of his crimes and his prior pattern of behavior. The gambling addiction counseling had come too late. Decades of deception had hardened into character, making rehabilitation a steeper climb. Your father still maintains the inheritance was real, Dorothy Lynch told Oliver over lunch at Coqueri Estiatorio, the same restaurant where she had once spotted Beatrice and Hubert's betrayal. The prison counselor says he's created such an elaborate fantasy that he half believes it himself. Oliver, now a rising star at the U.S. Attorney's Office, specializing in financial crimes, nodded understanding. His experience prosecuting similar cases had given him insight into the psychology of long-term fraud. The human capacity for self-deception is remarkable, he said, his Stanford Law Review pin replaced by a Department of Justice badge. I had a case last month, another family fraud scheme. I could see Dad's patterns playing out all over again. Sarah, now his wife of 4 years, squeezed his hand supportively. Their own young daughter, Eleanor, represented a new generation of Lynch family values: honesty, transparency, genuine connection. Across town at Berkeley's School of Architecture, Professor Violet Lynch prepared for her afternoon lecture. Her doctoral thesis, Architectural Transparency, Designing Spaces that Promote Emotional Honesty, had revolutionized approaches to institutional and family spaces. The irony of her mother's deception inspiring innovations in architectural psychology wasn't lost on her students. The Wong Center for Family Healing opens next month, she told her father over their weekly dinner. The center, built on the principles developed in her thesis, would provide space for Dorothy's expanded support network, now a nationally recognized program for families affected by fraud and addiction. Grant Lynch, silver now predominant in his hair, sat at the head of the table in the remodeled Pacific Heights home. The renovation, guided by Violet's principles, had transformed the space where so many lies had festered. The formal dining room where Beatrice had made her shocking announcement had been opened up, walls replaced with glass. Paula called from Washington, he mentioned, referring to his wife of 3 years. Paula Moon Lynch's appointment as deputy director of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division had taken her to D.C., but their relationship, built on a foundation of truth and shared values, remained strong through weekly commutes. The financial literacy program she developed based on our case has been implemented in 3 more states, he continued. They're using Dorothy's support group model as part of the rehabilitation framework. Dorothy Lynch, whose support network had grown into the National Center for Family Fraud Prevention, nodded approval. We've documented over 200 cases similar to ours. Each one teaches us more about prevention and healing. The doorbell chimed, and Oliver arrived with Sarah and Eleanor. The toddler ran to her Aunt Violet, who swept her up in a hug. Family dinners had become their anchor, a weekly ritual of honest connection that helped heal the wounds of betrayal. I received a letter from Mom, Violet said quietly as they moved to the living room. The space, once cluttered with expensive artifacts of pretense, now featured clean lines and open sight lines, reflecting her architectural philosophy. She's up for parole next month. The room absorbed this information in thoughtful silence. 5 years had given them perspective on Beatrice's choices, understanding of the complicated interplay between love, greed, and self-deception. The Fong brothers reached out through their lawyer, Oliver added. They finally accepted that they'll never see that $2 million. Dad's restitution payments barely cover the federal fines. In her Dublin prison cell, Beatrice Lynch prepared for another night of reflection. The small photos allowed on her wall showed a family she no longer knew, Oliver's wedding, which she'd watched through printouts of social media posts. Violet's graduation from Berkeley, her doctoral robes a statement of triumph over tragedy. Grant and Paula's simple courthouse ceremony, their happiness evident even in newspaper clippings. The last letter from Hubert had arrived 6 months ago, still insisting that the inheritance would come through, that his connections in Hong Kong were just waiting for the right moment. The prison psychiatrist called it pathological denial. Beatrice called it the end of a dream that had cost her everything real in pursuit of something false. Meanwhile, in the remodeled Pacific Heights home, the Lynch family gathered for dinner. Eleanor played on the floor with blocks, building towers that reflected her aunt's lessons about stable foundations. Oliver and Sarah shared news about their expected second child. Violet spread out plans for her next project, a rehabilitation center incorporating her principles of spatial honesty. Grant and Paula sat close on the sofa, their relationship a testament to the possibility of building something genuine from the ashes of deception. Dorothy arranged photos from the latest support group graduation, each success story a small victory against the patterns that had nearly destroyed their own family. In prison cells on opposite sides of the bay, Beatrice and Hubert lived with the consequences of their choices. But in the transformed Lynch family home, a new generation was learning that true wealth lay not in inherited millions or social status, but in the simple richness of honest love and genuine connection. As they gathered around the dinner table, Grant looked at the faces of his family. Not the perfectly posed masks of their former life, but the real, sometimes scarred, always authentic expressions of people who had learned the true value of honesty. To truth, he raised his glass, filled with modest local wine rather than borrowed expensive vintages. And to the family we've become because of it. The others joined the toast, their glasses containing everything from sparkling water to Eleanor's milk. Each of them carried scars from the betrayal that had shattered their perfect facade, but those very scars had shaped them into something stronger. A family built not on appearances or expectations, but on the solid foundation of truth. Outside, San Francisco's fog rolled in, shrouding the city in its nightly mystery. But inside the Lynch home, no shadows remained, no corners held secrets, and no promises needed to be gilded with lies. They had learned, through the hardest possible lesson, that the simplest truth was worth more than the grandest deception. Dorothy, watching Eleanor stack her blocks with determination, smiled at the symmetry. "Sometimes," she said softly, "we have to lose what we thought we wanted to find what we really need." The Lynch family saga had become more than a cautionary tale in San Francisco's social circles. It had transformed into a story of redemption, of rebuilding, of the strength found in facing truth rather than hiding behind lies. And in that transformation, they had discovered that the most valuable inheritance wasn't money or social status, but the legacy of honesty they would pass on to the next generation. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.